Presence, the podcast for everyone interested in bodywork, embodiment, and somatic practices. I'm Andrew Rosenstock, your host and guide on this enlightening journey. With my expertise as a somatic movement therapist, yoga therapist, and certified rolfer, I'll merge clinical insight with real-world experience to enrich our discussions with our guests. Through engaging and informative talks, this podcast delves into mind-body paradigms, offering insights and strategies to empower personal growth. Your support is vital for our grassroots and lo-fi production. If you connect with our content, please leave a positive review and subscribe on your preferred platform. Your engagement helps us reach a broader audience and supports our mission. So thanks for tuning in today to Touching into Presence. Fasten your seatbelt as we embark on a journey to explore the transformative power of contemplative and somatic practices together. In today's conversation, I'm joined again by Ryan Hofer and Paul Wirth for a second round of a triad of introspection. In this talk, we discuss and contemplate the writings of Osteopath Jim Jealous, the need for improved listening skills and training. We also explored different pedagogical approaches and the role of the autonomic nervous system in manual therapy, and a lot about the concept of structural integration. We go into some really fun and exploratory spaces, and I greatly enjoy being in conversation with these two. One note I want to put out there is that this talk came at the end of a really busy day for me, and you're going to hear that some of my cortical channels were not as up to snuff as they could have been. I lost my train of thought a few times, and thankfully Paul and Ryan were right there with me to pick them up, expand or contrast them, and move the conversation forward. I'm 3 hours ahead of them, and so even at the end of a long day for me, they're still in a good place of their mental processes, and I apologize to all you out there if you just kind of get tired of me. I also, being a little tired, may have had more of a negative hue today, and again, I thank Paul and Ryan for moving things forward and keeping it a little more light and getting me out of that little bubble. Ryan Hofer is fascinated by applications of body-based systems thinking and hands-on therapies. He graduated from the Dr. Ida P. Rolfe Institute and was the chair of a structural integration certification exam program. He has completed a Master's of Teaching and a Master's of Communication, and he is currently pursuing a doctorate in naturopathic medicine. Paul Wirth is a bodyworker and movement educator, a certified advanced rolfer, and a student and teacher of Tai Chi Chuan. His practice integrates structural integration, craniosacral therapy, visceral manipulation, and various kinds of movement work. A guiding question for Paul is, how does a person's innate capacity for healing make use of my presence and input, and what about that is up to me? He endeavors to continually be surprised by the reality that each person he works with is a living present being, and to undertake practices that remind him that he is too. Anyways, with that, let's hop into the talk.
Well, I listened to our previous conversation, and as I'm sure you did, obviously, Andrew, because you edited it, and I think you did too, Ryan. And we covered so many things, and I'm excited to talk more. And I'm interested in. This is somewhat self-centered, but I'm just for the sake of honesty, I'm interested in clarifying my own thoughts. And I found myself, as often people do, hard to listen to. So I was described once by a friend in college as lost in my own complexity, and that's continued to be true. So I hope that I stay lost in a positive way and don't lose people either.
Well, I haven't listened to the recording yet, so I'm trying to, and that's why I appreciate your notes so much. But I was thinking that, like, oh man, okay, I'm gonna have to go back and listen to my own voice and hear myself. But I really enjoyed being part of that call with you, Paul, and I think that it, and I was excited to do this one too, and hopefully another one, because I was hoping that would develop over time. So yeah, I don't be too self-conscious about it. It was really enjoyable to be a part of. And
It was, yeah. Thanks.
I want to say, like, does that relate to your coherence? Like, is that kind of what you're going for? Like, getting this
Mhm.
coherence out of the complexity and like making it more succinct? Is that kind of what you're saying, or just
Um,
developing the ideas in a different way?
yes to the first thing. My intent was more the second. I just want to be more. I would like to, for the sake of our conversation and my own thinking and anyone listening, to to be succinct when it's possible. And
Hmm.
but it does definitely relate in a adjacent way to that concept of coherence that I was emailing you guys about.
Hmm.
And yeah, I'd love to talk about that if we get to it now or
Hmm.
later. Yeah.
Oh,
Hmm.
Paul, one thing I'll share from my own experience. I mean, first of all, similar to Ryan, I enjoyed listening to, both to you in conversation, but also hearing it afterwards. And there was actually someone, James, who was in your class with Hero, who I was in a class with before, and at one point
Oh
we were
yeah.
talking. Yeah, a lovely guy, and we were talking. He's like, "Hey, I've been listening to the podcast, and you seem to be like getting better at that, and similar, like more coherent, more able to kind of say this and that." And one of the reasons why I believe was I was speaking more, getting things out more, but I was also listening more. I was editing myself and hearing myself and hearing what I was saying and what I wasn't saying. And so I'm grateful that I get to be a part of your process, that you get to express as you express, which is brilliant, which is why I'm so excited to be in conversation with you both. And then also you get to later listen to it and use that as a tool to refine your own way. And so it's like one of the ways, if you're trying to do that, that you can do that without really trying, is this. So ta-da.
Thank
Yeah,
you. Yeah.
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 Yeah, and I think like we've talked about education, and that's what the article started off too. And I remember I told you that it's like it's so much of what I've been feeling about learning that it has to involve a self-reflective process. And so what kind of an environment can set that up to, because we have to have a space where we can not only correct like big mistakes, but just refine things over and over in a community, because we need that. We have to ping things off of other people who kind of have like our peers, it's the same sort of thing as peer review. I really think that's a powerful way to learn, and that's what doesn't happen in the majority of educational settings. Like he says right off the bat, he says, let's look at the conditions in medical education. The whole process of becoming a physician is largely contradictory to the principles of healing. Students are not nurtured, nor are they encouraged to explore, nor are they communicated with as fellow travelers in a remarkably beautiful journey into the mountains of life. The healing arts have become quite sterile, and the biomolecular view of healing has distinct limits, limits that trim off the individual, in quotes. This, of course, is a reflection of the educational ecosystem. The growth and development of a physician should be nurtured by the most loving and perceptive environment that is humanly possible. This is paramount to bring a complete picture of illness into focus.
That's Jealous.
Yeah, yeah,
That's from the article.
Mhm.
yeah, right. Then he really kind of starts off with that. And so I think if we want to foster our change, our change into something more, it really calls for a loving and perceptive environment, and where we can try things out and then reflect on what could be improved. And lots of times we don't really get that. We get kind of an information dump, and then we get to try it once, and then it's like, good enough, moving on. And it's not, it doesn't stick, and it's not deep, and it's not relational, and there's not kind of these cross currents and the ability to like network information. And so I find myself like a lot of times scrambling in classes. And I remember through my basic training doing this, and directly afterwards, I was like, there's got to be like other things out there, and kind of like grabbing all this stuff that was just kind of self-study and grabbing books. Like I mentioned, the Maitland book, Embodied Being, which I really enjoyed. But yeah, it's just and that translates so much into like, I don't think that, change is so different in, different contexts, I guess. I guess I would kind of view like an education as sort of like a type of therapeutic window, like, because you're there to like improve along a dimension, right? You're there to open things up, to have that space to try and edit your ways of doing like your knowledge. And I've just been thinking a lot about like what's the best environment for that to happen in, because I'm going through this program right now, and because I want to provide that for patients and clients.
I'm kind of reminded, I saw, it's somewhat perfect timing, as I saw a client yesterday who was coming in. I've been seeing him for a while, chronic pain stuff. And, he sees another rolfer. He sees, I think, a chiropractor, a physio, a Pilates person, a personal trainer, and they're all telling him different things. And he's getting really lost in it. And one of the things I said to him, and I say this in a lot, I say, you recognize I'm not telling you, like, I'm not actually, like, what's going on first is we're listening, we're having a dialogue, whether it's a verbal or just a spacious one. And that is, I didn't say this to him, but that is largely what is not happening in a lot of the trainings. Is it's not being taught to listen, and I mean, first just listen, which I think Jealous is talking about, and then for me, as I got more into we'll say like the somatic realm, the big shift was into a experiential versus prescriptive. But the issue is largely is prescriptive saves time, right? Yeah. So that's like, you want to train prescriptive because statistics are your friends, until they're not. And so I think Jealous maybe has found ways of having both, which I think is you need a bit of both. And as I hear what you're saying, Ryan, is there's just not as much of the listening and the being with and the allowing for things to unfold. And the experiential, there is much more of the prescriptive. And even this is slightly different, but just to close my thing up with this, one of the most common things is you hear is, you don't go to the doctor for their personality, and that bedside manner isn't necessarily there, and it might be getting better, but that alone is like, you're going into this relationship and you have this power dynamic and you have this aggressive shortness. Like, how does that allow for a healing process to happen if you're already into a compact space?
Yeah.
I want to just interject that because one of the themes that shows up so far in our conversation before and in our private conversations, one of them,
don't air those live, Paul. Those are our secrets.
There was that one. One theme is about the pedagogy and since we are, although this podcast is geared towards body workers of many kinds, SI is sort of central because you are
it's our common link,
and it's our common link. So we end up discussing the training we're familiar with, and so some of that is questioning or critical of the training as we understand it or experienced it. I definitely have strong opinions about those things and critiques both of training as I experienced it and I'm aware of it, and of institutional processes. And I just want to kind of do two things by saying this. One is state what we all know anyway, which is that we only know what our personal experience was, and of course it's subjective. But also kind of like whether it's up to you guys whether we want to like. I just have like a little flag go up in my mind when that topic comes up, and I'm kind of tagging it with like an invisible tag. Like now we're talking about the training, and now we're talking about the practice as we understand our practice. We don't necessarily have to be explicit each time, but I think it's helpful for me to be clear in my mind because the conversation quickly meanders, and I enjoy that between practice as we know it and training.
Were you hearing that
about that?
Were you hearing that last part in relation to SI or to a larger systemic system?
I was hearing it in relation to SI, but I realized I didn't have a basis to. You might have been talking about more general.
Yeah, I was the way that I was taking it, which is it's great to kind of be in this because it also it's never made me think about this, but it makes me now think about people listening. I could be having a conversation with someone and they may be hearing an entirely different conversation. So that's great. I heard Ryan, bringing in the osteopathic thing and then looking at his own naturopathic, but really going into a more global way of education as a whole, not just what we know, but what we've been seeing in other ways. And because he was talking in the Jealous article, they're talking about physicians. So the way that at least how I was responding was not really about SI in particular, but about education and how do we foster different ways of educating, because the general current system, as I understand it, or seems to maybe we understand it, has more of that prescriptive as opposed to experiential. So, Ryan, was that where you were?
Yeah, I'm thinking of a lot of my educational experiences and how a lot of them have been you sort of listen to an expert tell you something and then you kind of produce something based on that contact with the subject as they transmitted it to you, in contrast to doing a more like observational time and then finding out what everybody in your small group thinks about the subject, and something along the lines of the teacher, the instructor, is actually speaking less than half the time. Would just be like a general rule, right? That I would think of in as I'm planning this current class that I'm going to teach and any future classes.
Is that like almost a teacher as like almost a referee of sorts, or like a navigator of sorts?
Yeah. To say like you should be talking to each other, not to me. And I'm just there to bounce things back to keep the flow going.
Yeah, something I say when I'm like with clients, although it's one-on-one and not in group, is like I'm I sometimes will say like I'm a free range chicken farmer and I'm just
Yeah, yeah,
always like having you run around and I'm slowly
yeah.
monitoring like is that too far and do we have to move the boundaries that okay those boundaries are too big these boundaries are too small and where is in this case for you like where is the group within that how can I foster a sense of your own inquiry and I can step in when needed and say, yeah, that's great. You know, what about this? What about that? Or yeah, that 20 years ago that's what it was, but what we found was this and this. Now go experience more. But of having that,
Hmm.
again, the referee is one way I'm thinking of it, but that's probably not the right word. But,
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
yeah. But also, Paul,
Well,
I want to just quickly say, Paul, like I want to appreciate what you did say before, because it is really important, and it's a callback to last talk that, and there's something I don't think we did say last, and so it's a nice way of acknowledging that because we're three people with opinions, and I think that we all know our opinions are just that, but people can hear that and take it one way or another, or think, oh, they're really this or that, and that's not the case, and um, I think it is important to acknowledge everything you did acknowledge. So I want to
mhm.
pause and just say, thanks for that, and yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. I think it's worthwhile um, to be continuing to loop between teaching and the learning experience and the questions of how one practices because they're all they're all part of the whole biography of it. So it makes sense that we're curious in all those realms.
Mhm.
Well, isn't that what Dr. Rolf said? We are educators.
Mm-hmm. And always students. I don't know if she said that, but it's definitely true.
Well, we're also. I don't know about Ryan. Well, I think the three of us are inspired by Zen, and so there's a beginner's mind aspect in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something that came up a moment ago when you were talking, Ryan. I I sort of had a jumping off question just to sort of throw out there um, and see what ripples it creates. You could say it like this: In what ways is a session a performance? And related to that, how does performance and practice, with their various meanings, come into healing work? Loaded question.
No, it's a
Performance,
great.
is it
It's a great
contrasted
question.
with something?
Did you say what did you say, Ryan?
Did you have a contrast with performance?
Like performance versus something else?
Yeah, was that in the question, or was it just is it a
No, it wasn't
performance?
in the question. Not sure there's one implied, but I'll just say the reason I think the question came up was you were talking about typical experience in learning and in educational circles where one's given information and then you essentially have to then you have to perform and the word performance just sort of
Hmm.
blew up in big letters in my mind and there are different aspects and different meanings to performance that all connect with me. Performance as um, the kind of did I perform well or badly? Did I do what I expected myself, or the client expected of me, or my teacher expected of me? Um, and then there's practice for performance and practice for increasing skill. And then there's
Hmm.
also as performance as a like in art or in
Yeah,
an event. there's a performance, there's an event happening.
Mm.
But that's how I think I took it more of the latter one, and that's partly because I'm working with a client who is a therapist, and we ended up talking about being in perform like they get into a performance when they're doing general life stuff, not just as a therapist. And so that had me thinking a bit, and I've thought about this before of like a bit of when I step in, I'm doing my best to not do this, but do I step into the role of body worker starring, Andrew in the performance of the whatever, and playing a performance and I don't think that I am playing that right now to some extent, but then again, like not to get too whatever, but aren't we all in some performance of playing the role of ourself or uh and I think the maybe more introspective or working at how do we not get into that and how do we be our absolute self or the face of ourself before our we were born or whatever that Zen yeah yeah so I took it a little bit more of that, but I also can see how you're saying it like so in the frame of SI, right, there is a ritual which performance and ritual go so well together, and so there's a ritual of let's call it a 10 series, and in session one we have the performance ahead of us, and you know do I get the goals, am I hitting that which has some value, and then also, well, what if that performance isn't needed for this client, you know yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of wondering if it's related all to the techniques that we do versus the holism that we're supposedly going for or enhancing, and also how the the session, the hour, is this contrived environment. It's a created thing, just like a visit to an MD, a 20-minute visit to an MD is a contrived situation. Okay, you go in here, you do this, go to this little room, they ask you these questions, we this, and this. So I yeah, I don't know. I think it is in a way, but is it could also kind of be blown up, like maybe it's an improv yes and process. Because if you're listening and
the guy who told me I was lost in my own complexity, he was a partner in an improv acting class.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, he's kind of like, yeah, just roll. Yeah, just go with it.
Not a good place to be lost in your own complexity.
The movement, right? Yeah, move, go.
Oh, yeah, I forget if I said this in the last talk, if I said this in a private message, or if I didn't share it. I don't remember, but it's what you said, Ryan, is something aligned with what I'll say to clients of like, by the way, this is an entirely artificial environment we're in. Like, this is not the real, like, this is the real world, but like, you're coming in here to have a contrived situation so that when you go back to, the outside world, your normal life, you can function better. So we're like taking you out of that and having this contrived thing. And whether that's a performance, there's again, it's a yes and a no and. The thing what you were saying though, like about technique is, well, how do you do any technique? You perform it, right? And that's I think what you're always what you have been getting at, and to tie it into that holism of like, are we doing the techniques? Are we just performing the ritual, or are we having a more, we'll say, holistic experience where we can sit and listen, and instead of having it be technique driven or having it be uh, I don't know what I guess. I don't want to say holistic driven. I don't know. I don't actually know. I'll say client driven or spacious driven. I don't have it. That's why I guess I'm in conversation with you both.
I thought it was just because you liked us.
It's that too. It's that. I mean, us implies both of you. I won't say which one.
Ryan, I interjected, and I think I interrupted your train of thought.
No, I did. If you did, I don't remember. But okay. I was here. I'll read another quote from the interview. Jealous says, "This conversation I'm having with you on a less detailed level goes on with my patients most of the time. I'm not trying to talk them into it. I can't say I love them in the usual sense of the word, but I see something in them and I know it's coming out, and I ask, why not right now? Why don't they all get better? It's just not time, and that's the only answer. The patient should not be blamed for not getting well. If the standard medical people make mistakes in not giving patients enough time to understand the body, soul, and spirit as a unit, alternative healthcare practitioners make equally bad mistakes when they make the patient responsible for not being conscious enough to get well. It's no one's fault. It's more about tempo and healing time. People aren't stupid. Most people are very bright. Some doctors think they're smarter than everybody else, but it's not true. We are all very human." So Amen. It's a performance, but if you're attached to the results and insisting on the results, then I think it kind of turns into a closed-ended. It's like the sort of like, you know how the movie's going to end or something. You're like, oh yeah, okay, I get this. Like the hero does this and the villain does this or something like that. So that's kind of what I would hope to, I guess, avoid, and to make it more open-ended, an open-ended performance, or something that's like the novelty is foregrounded, like something's changing internally, like the system is rearranging itself.
I'm really enjoying this question more now because of the ways in which you can not only interpret performance as different meanings or connotations of it, but also just looking at it as a negative thing or a positive thing. And it's easy to see, and I know it's easy to see in myself, a performative aspect getting in the way of a therapeutic relationship or outcome, and just getting in the way of me being present. But a little bit further, and you both have alluded to this or spoken to it, there are positive aspects or just unavoidable aspects to the presence of some kind of performance in the work, whether it's performing a technique or performing the contrived experience as expected, as paid for. There's and another aspect of what, or something else that I draw on is, musical performance or dramatic performance comes with technique and comes with a lot of practice, a lot of memorization, a lot of, even if you're an improvisatory jazz performer, there's a lot of legwork and a lot of knowledge underneath that. But if you're not, even if you're doing something like a classical piece, I saw I'll try to dig it up. It was a YouTube video of, I think it might have been Andre Previn, but some master musician with a young performer helping him through this very complicated piece. And he's playing it live and basically encouraging and commanding him like this, like that, while the kid is continuing to finish the piece, a very dramatic piece. And it's beautiful to watch because it's a scripted piece, but he brings the heart of this kid out through his fingers into that piano. I think it was a piano. Yeah. And there's something special there, and I think it stands for what I think we all try to do in our practices too, because there's always going to be rote things. There's always that we're creatures of habit. We hopefully try to break those habits. Sometimes they're useful, and the things that we learn by rote and the techniques that we learn are useful until they're not, or until such time as we've moved on from them or found something else. But we're looking for something to enliven the performance that's taking place in the room. And also a question arises in my mind as or a fork in the road or a decision process about who or what is centered in that performance. And somebody like Jealous and Biodynamic, for example, centers some other process as the central star of the show.
Yeah.
Whether I think I'm a big deal, or more likely if I think I'm not measuring up and therefore making myself a big deal. Either way, I center myself as the star of the show, and that gets in the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you can also go, I said, the other way, where there's whether I'm the star of the show or I'm not even in the show, right? The show's not even me. I think this may actually tie a bit into what you were talking about, individual. Well, that can be a performance. I mean, that's the whole, like, how many meditators are saying, I've dissolved my ego, right? There's no more ego. And it's like, well, who's speaking then? Or who's aware that there's no ego? So they can be a bit of a performance in that. Again, this is going to, I think, come back into a sense of one of my favorite topics, which is a bit of the non-dual, well, it's not this, it's not that, and it's both. Or so I clearly am a fan of improv because I'm always yes-anding in that. I think one of the things that I understand of what Jealous is trying to do when he was talking about like rote memorization, it's not exactly that, but he's about get it in your body so you can feel it and understand the health as he refers to it. And so it's that the information doesn't come into the central nervous system and go up to the processing. It comes into the central nervous system and stays in that felt sense and that awareness. And so that the route information knows this health has more health or whatever that sort of diagnostic or metric is. I got off on a bit there. I apologize. And I don't apologize. I think it's useful, but it's a lot, and it's I'll stop because I can't say more at this point.
I was following you.
Yeah.
I have to do another quote because I think it works. It says the idea of whole, a unit, the undivided, is foreign to our culture and is slowly vanishing like an aboriginal form that is viewed as primitive, in quotes, by the intellect. Each one of us faces the reality in ourselves and must meet that responsibility first. Then the perception will follow. For our culture, it's a, quote, deep, unquote, question. For the Aboriginal soul, it's a natural state. We need to focus not so much on cause and effect, but on the priority of the whole as it moves in relation to a great mystery. Teaching requires an effort in the same direction, a view of the whole, capital W, whole individual moving into new dimensions of life. We need to protect the eco-receptive perception that is our natural state of being. This is slowly being trimmed away, and as a result, people are more sick than necessary.
I want to say something like this, and it's going to be controversial, but I'm just going to say it because while I don't disagree with that. This is one of the things I struggle with is to me, this is almost the same of what we're saying, but in a different way, where we are praising or praising the other, the Aboriginal,
Yeah.
and first of all, is that like, have we created a false narrative of other practices, Aboriginal, this, shaman, whatever, and really glorify them because we're so fed up with our systems, and whether they're colonial, I don't really necessarily want to go down into that because I think that gets muddled. But there's maybe we can say a Western centric, a allopathic centric, whatever that is not a whole practice. That is a much more a some is not as great as the whole, or parts or something. And so then this isn't working, and then we look to these things that we've seen a little bit of, and we give them this great value. Which I wonder, is that practice really as great as we're making it out to be? And also, are we not just creating another separation in that?
It's a good question, and I think it's really important. I think that I don't have the personal experience with other cultures to justify, and I recognize there's a lot of romanticization and hand waving and othering and sort of diminution of the complexity of other cultures by projecting things that we'd like to project on them. I think those are all very worthwhile pitfalls to point out. I don't know what Jealous is, since you were quoting Jealous, Ryan. I don't know what his experience with those cultures has been, but let's say, someone has been in touch with them. I don't think there's any problem given some caution around the pitfalls you pointed out, Andrew. I don't think there's a problem with recognizing that there may be a particular sickness or missing piece that's prevalent in our culture that another doesn't seem to have. And I think you can do that without necessarily making it black and white and making them all good and us all bad.
Sure. Yeah. And I want to make it clear, I'm not saying other cultures are not great at all. And I think that's clear, but I just want to make it clear, as you said, it's like pointing out the pitfalls that we can do of the romanticization. And then also the conflation that happens where something gets brought in, are you familiar with the pizza effect? Isn't that what that terminology? No. So I think you both like it, and maybe listeners as well. The pizza effect is this I think it's a sociology term where or maybe anthropology. I always get those two kind of confused, but that like pizza, I guess traditionally in Italy wasn't like a deep cheese. It was like, like lighter breads and little light toppings, more maybe like bruschetta or more like other stuff. And that when people were mixing in New York, there were more different cultures. Of course, the Europeans were mixing, but there was more different cultures, and the heavier cheese of the Dutch is what I believe it was. And so all of a sudden, pizza became thick cheese, and it became a different pizza. And it got re-imported back into Italy. So you'll find that there, but that's not like traditional pizza. However, if you talk to people, that is pizza. So it's that when a culture gets partly exported and then the newer one gets re-imported back in, and that's what's known. So I think some of that can get happen. And then that's like, well, we're talking about this practice or this culture or this way of being that actually has very little to do with the actual culture that was.
Yeah, the main thing that I pulled out of it was preserving the eco-receptive perception. So that's what I really think about as far as like, okay, being open and listening and editing the performance as it unfolds so that it is a sort of improvisation, but it's not totally chaotic, and that keeping it integrated without being chaotic or rigid. I think that openness to the ecology going on around you can provide that gateway. So that was the more the and yeah, perceiving that whole was the big message that I took from that part of it.
Apologies for taking away from that by putting my interlude in, because there's so much great in what you say, and I don't want to make it this contrarian whatever. I did want to more put that in, but you're right. And I don't think it was in this article. One of you did mention it, but there's one of the tapes of Jealous when he's talking, and he mentions Dave Abrams, and he's really all about. He's like, this Dave Abrams is really onto something here. And I remember thinking that before I listened to the tape, because a lot of what I hear you saying there is like really aligned with Abrams's viewpoints. And I remember at one point, I remember after I read Stella the Sensuous, I said, this book should be mandatory for every body worker. Like,
yeah, I remember you brought it up
worker.
before. Yeah, and now I'm listening to it now.
Yeah. And do you see the relation with that and what Jealous is saying?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And Paul, you did read his book?
Yeah, years ago. I loved it. Yeah. I want to return to the theme with all of its many branches that of technique and holism that you were getting into, Ryan. And one repeated theme within that is that the Jealous brings up in many different ways, but also shows up in a lot of other dimensions, and my own, and I'm sure your experiences as well, is receptivity. And you just quoted eco-receptive state. Was that it?
Yeah, I think so.
Eco-receptive consciousness or something.
Yeah, eco-receptive perception.
And that's a beautiful phrase, and it brings up a lot of associations for me. For now, I'm just stepping back to the receptive part of that, because the receptivity seems to be one thing that, Ryan, it seems to be related to some of your questions and critiques of how teaching is done, in that the receptivity balance is off. More, correct me if I'm wrong, but more that students are sort of receptacles, but their own for information, but their own quality of receptivity and perceptiveness is less fostered, and possibly the receptivity of the teacher is not to the student isn't as on.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think there's usually a lot of outflow from the lectern, right? And there's not a lot of sort of receptivity, and then there's not a lot of sort of students receiving information from other students. Right, there's not as much of an ecology. It's just like this sort of like beam from the instructor out to the students, like this one-way beam of like information, the transmission. But it seems to me like and then I think that can be applied too to sort of like an advanced practitioner knows so much that they're going to kind of beam this technique and this information into the client's body, and then that body is better off afterwards. And usually there's there is improvement, and usually in classes we do learn something, but I do really wonder, and a lot of the educational research that I come into contact with kind of says there's better ways of doing this information and energy exchange that goes on in an educational environment, educational container.
And you
Um,
shared a little bit, just to interject, you shared with us a neurological page that dealt directly with receptivity on a neurological level, the afferent pathways.
yeah, and that's why I really liked it because it was so cool. And I, yeah, I have it here. So, um, this is from the Science and Clinical Application of Manual Therapy, a book with, like we're talking about, multiple chapters and contributors. But this guy is kind of a autonomic nervous system researcher, um, and I think he's German, and I think it's Wilfried Janig. And he writes, in the definition of the terms sympathetic and parasympathetic, afferent neurons are not included. About 85% of the axons in the vagus nerves and up to 50% of those in the spinal splanchnic nerves are afferent and are called vagal or spinal visceral afferents, respectively. They come from sensory receptors in the internal organs and have their cell bodies in the ganglia of the ninth and 10th nerves and in the dorsal root ganglia of the spinal segments corresponding to the autonomic outflow. To label thoracolumbar and sacral afferents sympathetic or parasympathetic respectively is misleading. This does not conflict with the idea that visceral afferents are integral components of most autonomic reflexes and regulations. So it just kind of really opened my thinking about it, that even in our discussion of the physiology of it, we talk about parasympathetic and sympathetic a lot, but we really don't talk about visceral afferents, which are the majority of the vagus nerve, is inflow to the brain, and it's giving perceptive information to the brain, and it's always listening to that. It's just got a pattern that it's decided on already in a prediction that's already working. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to connect and like more trend towards, is being sensitive to that, being receptive, and then to also acknowledge that that's what's going on in a body all the time. And that's like the feedback loop. And in fact, that would be what we were really affecting with soft tissue manipulations, because we're not getting into somebody's brain and giving him a different neurotransmitter. Or, well, I mean, maybe cranial manipulations might directly affect the brain, but a lot of times if you're working on the peripheral nervous system, you are changing that inflow information going to the brain. And that's what I think triggers the change in the pattern.
Ryan, for curiosity, is what you're talking about different or the same or other than the enteric nervous system?
So it's different. That's also, the enteric nervous system is also part of the autonomic nervous system. So you have sympathetic, parasympathetic, and enteric,
Enteric, right.
because it's kind of operating, it's integrated, but it's also operating on its own semi-independently.
Right. So the neuroganglia you're speaking of there that are not any of those, they're not enteric. It's different than
There's a whole, yeah, there's
okay.
a whole system in the gastrointestinal tract that it's getting information and it's doing things on its own.
Yeah.
Yeah, like contractions or like secretions.
Yeah.
But that's also integrated into the central nervous system,
Right.
and the brain.
Yeah.
But it can kind of operate in its own loops too,
Right.
as I understand it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if this will. I was thinking a little bit what you were saying, I think, Paul, about the different ways, and I was thinking a bit about like about ways of teaching, and when I went through my SI training versus when I went through my biodynamic training, how in some way they looked very similar, in that it would be a lecture of some sort and then a hands-on of some sort. And I don't know, was it different because I was so different? Was it different because it was a different classroom? Was it different because it's a different structure? But in my experience, at least looking back, the SI was partly mimicking the teacher a lot. At least and again, how I perceive it, was, but how I perceive my training was a lot of the teacher would say something, and I'm thinking of phase two in particular, and we kind of would do that, and a little bit less of our own what's going on and how to play with it. It was really more focus driven. Whereas in the biodynamic, it was much more of a the teacher was saying stuff, but they weren't. There was a lot more open endedness to it, a lot more exploration to it, and so when we would do our hands on, for the most part, it was a lot less of doing to people and a lot more of, well, how's this? Well, you're liking that. Less competitive, I would almost say. And to me, there, at least in my training, the Rolf Institute, there was a competitiveness that was kind of underneath it. At least again, how I perceived or remembering it. And in a lot of my biodynamic, we didn't quite have that, and so you had these two things that really looked similar. Um, and I'm reflecting back on one of the, I forget if I shared this before. One of the teachers I had studied with extracurricular biodynamic, I had reached out to him and said, my training, I need to read a Franklin Sills book, and volume 2 is cheaper than volume 3, and I don't really want to spend like $50 on a book. Is anything really missing? And he was like, you can read the books, but this work doesn't happen in the books, right? It happens in the field. And so I'm also then wondering how much of was the biodynamic that we were in this field phenomena where we're exploring and sharing and being in this holism spectrum of sorts. I don't as usual, I don't have the answers, only more questions, but it's making me think a bit about how we kind of actually are. It feels me a tying of sorts of what we're talking about. So
That's interesting. Yeah. The I have a whole slew of things that are I want to respond with, but I the first one place that I go is thinking about. So I was trained at the Rolf Institute, now Deary, and at some point, I think I don't know what point, but they had abandoned the old auditing and practicing format where that the guild still does, where where beginning students would spend the entire first part of their training observing work by more advanced students on clients, or maybe on other students. I'm not sure. So you would basically spend weeks not doing work, but being in the field and observing, and then after that you would then practition. And of course, I'm guessing there was plenty of lecture and other stuff too, but there was a lot of being in the field of the work, and that wasn't done in my training and isn't done now. And there's a certain amount of there's a lot of respect I have for that format, although I didn't experience it. But at least in theory, I have a lot of respect for that because it does bring a kind of level of, at least an opportunity to be a witness and receptive to the experience of what's happening. The other train of thought, which I'm having, that I've wanted to bring up before, I just haven't found an opportunity, but I've been thinking about I think you could probably find parallels with other forms of healing and healing training. I don't know what they are, but the 10 series, as taught by Ida Rolf and as taught through most programs, is is a recipe, it's a form. I'm familiar and a student of Tai Chi, which is commonly taught in a series of movements in a form. Both of those things have in common that the form, or in Rolfing's case, the recipe, teaches you as you continue to practice it. You practice it, you practice it. So it fills in the gaps of what you may have not gotten the first time around, or could have gotten by a book or by a lecture. In that sense, it's kind of encoded information, or it's thought to be encoded information that and I think you could say, if I was arguing that side, if I was say a structural integration teacher teaching in the traditional way, I might advocate for that form of teaching and for that style of work, fairly I'm not going to say rigid, but fairly uh, adhering to a particular protocol. Um, I might advocate for that by saying, just as it's encoded in, the recipe teaches the student, the recipe teaches the client, the recipe, the information is encoded in that, in the changes one evokes in the fascia. And it's an interesting perspective. I think there's something to it, and I think it has gaps, but I just wanted to get that idea out there.
Well, I don't, yeah, I don't think, I think you could have elements of both. Um, as far as techniques and listening, that's kind of what brought me to this idea of like assessments, which was in the Maitland book. And I recall we talked about this, but it was presented as the taxonomies, but Maitland calls them in the book, started calling them 5 interrelated types of assessment and intervention. The 5 types are as follows: structural assessment and intervention, geometric assessment and intervention, functional assessment and intervention, energy assessment and intervention, psychobiological orientation or intentionality assessment and intervention. So I think you could do a 10 series with territory concerns while also, I don't know how you would exactly choose which assessment and intervention to use, without, I guess, looking at the whole, but you could, listen in those different ways. Try tuning your antenna to those different ways, and see what you picked up, and then try that for a little while and see how it landed,
Yeah,
I'm sure there are ways to do both.
yeah, I think this kind of ties back into what one of you were saying before, where it's like, I think theoretically you kind of learn them all, and maybe not fully, but you get a sense of all of them, and then in what you're, even when you said like tune your antenna, I want to be like, let your antenna be tuned, so that you're
Mhm.
not looking out to like, oh, I have to look for this, as opposed to what's calling to me at this. Is it an energetic thing that's calling me right now?
Mhm.
Is it a structural? I never understood the difference between structural and geometric. Like, isn't geometry fucking
Yeah. Yeah,
structure?
I didn't get
But
the geometric.
but it's okay. I struggle with that one a lot. But yeah, anyways, so like, it's really, at least for me in my practice, it's like, one of my clients said today, hey, you must be so tired of like always having to think. And I'm like, I'm doing my best not to think. I'm doing my best to sit with and see what's arising and respond to that, again, from that felt place, not from that logical. So it's like, okay, this is a structural. We gotta really, something is holding this out of place, and it's more of that lesion as opposed to inhibition. And sometimes it's not. It's this other. And the more that we can, at least for me, the more that I can, but I think for all of us, step back and let our antennas be tuned or this channel's bringing me in, this bandwidth is saying let's go there, the more, yeah, again, I got excited and kind of lost my place. But I know
Yeah.
You had
Paul's
a
with
long
me.
day, but I followed
Had a
you.
long
Yeah,
day.
you're
Yeah.
you're looking for you're pointing out um, I think it sounds to me like you're agreeing with Ryan that that's interesting, but just raising the point that there needs to be, or there can be the missing piece of whose agency are we employing?
Mhm.
Yeah.
What's the intent? Is it, and again, for this conversation, my favorite word right now is receptivity.
Hmm.
And is
Hmm.
there a
Yeah.
receptive quality to the teaching, to the learning, and to the
Mhm.
practicing? Um, and is it being fostered, or what's getting in the way of it? Does that kind of get to what you're saying, Andrew?
Yeah. I think I also want to, like, you hit something that just for people listening, I want to say, which is I've been really busy recently, and I'm grateful for that. But I'm clearly not as eloquent, and I'm 3 hours ahead of you all in that. But yeah, I think the reset, like, again, yeah, I think the receptivity is a bit of that. And I'm even tying that receptivity into the antennas, because what do antennas do? But they pick up that reception, and
Mm.
it's a bit about, maybe you guys have done this. I do this with my clients a lot, about teaching them how to be in a more receptive and peripheral way of seeing. So I have them look at a spot or something on the wall, and then I have the spot look at them.
Mm.
And again, there's that tuning in and out. So instead of me tuning in to that and seeing that, I let that see me, and all of a sudden I have a different receptivity with
Yeah.
things, and it brings it into a more introspective or introspective way. And
I just um, as a footnote, I know next to nothing, almost nothing about radio electronics, but I think I do understand that you have to turn a radio on, and it's not only for the uh, to run the speaker, but there actually is an active process of the antenna has to be tuned. The antenna has to have something running through it, or at least
mm,
the whatever it is, diode or whatever that's connected to the antenna has to it actively tunes the antenna to a particular station. And I think it can be more passive because the exact based on the
mm,
length of the antenna, it's going to naturally pick up certain wavelengths, or it can be dynamic based on electronics. But the point and the analogy being that the tuning, there's a receptive quality to the radio, but it requires something active um, to tune into whatever frequency. It's
yeah,
maybe
and
stating the obvious, but yeah.
and then to make it even more obvious, regardless, the frequency is there.
Mm-hmm. All of them are there. Yeah.
Yes,
But not
yes.
all of them are useful. Yeah.
Not all of them are useful, at least as we understand usefulness today, right
In that
now,
context. Yeah.
in
Yeah.
that context. Yeah, but
Yeah.
they're all there, and there may be other ways to tune into them that we haven't learned at this point. That's
Mm-hmm.
less about radio waves and more about about sitting with people. And
Yeah.
to me, that almost is like a beautiful callback to the beginning, which is like, well, how do we teach to change this system of listening into a different way? How do we bring that into education? Because
Mm.
because
Yeah.
it's there. The people are ready. Well, maybe not the people are ready, but there's this here. And so how does that shift happen?
Yeah. Ryan, you look like you're about to say something.
Well, what am I thinking? Yeah, I think that sort of cultivating that feedback loop is to relate back to um like that's the flow of information that then induces the flow of fluids in the body, that to me, that seems much more likely to connect with the fluid body in contrast to prescriptive pushing on tissues. And I think that that's a more like, I think, nutrifying process overall for all parties involved. And that's what I would like to cultivate in myself in many areas of my life. But I'm connecting it both with that kind of, let's say, information, verbal information, and also more like attunement in like a hands-on context.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm finding myself wanting to, I've wanted to bring up and argue for more what do you call it? More credit to be given to students, and at least in the lineage that I'm from, for their own natural subtlety. And it sounds like that's in alignment with what you're arguing for, Ryan, too.
Yeah, I think
And
so.
that, like, my experience of the little microculture of SI has been one in which I was at least given the impression that mastery was possible. There were venerated practitioners and are venerated practitioners. Great skill is possible. And that one attribute of that great skill that's possible is very cool to astonishing levels of subtlety, whether it's subtle perception or subtle contact, uh, quote unquote, feeling through the body or feeling across the room. And I've had a convoluted and difficult relationship with that mythos that I took on. And while I don't disagree that there is clearly, like, you get better at stuff. Things that are difficult or obscure become easier the more you practice and the more you experience. There's something disingenuous about that mythology that doesn't give, and especially where that mythology is either explicitly or implicitly in the teaching. It's disingenuous because it doesn't give credit to the student's natural, already awake, already ready to sense qualities. I think this, for me, gets back to possibly what you were describing is the difference between your biodynamic training, Andrew, and your SI training. At least that's how I hear it. That maybe there was more space for the co-participation of student and client and student with student, and their receptivity to arise.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reflecting on my SI training with different teachers, and I think while I agree with the both of you, I also am thinking of teachers like Carol, who we've mentioned before. I think will probably be mentioned before, who who no longer teaches for the Institute, but did. And I would imagine that she taught in a slightly different way. Or I think of teachers like Duffy, who I haven't studied with, but I've had talks with. And, and I think there are other teachers who aren't maybe teaching in that same way, although still in relation to the lineage, who are allowing for more of the students' experience and their God, I'm trying to figure out what's the word they say in session 10, like glorious or radiant brilliance. Is that the word?
Uniform brilliance, I think.
Uniform
Yeah.
brilliance. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So allow for the uniform brilliance to always be there. Um,
Mhm.
so I do. I mean, I agree with you for the most part, and I think that's part of the issue is that we do as humans love to go into stereotypes of sorts, the statistical things that don't take account the whole, and that's how language is and thought is. And so I agree with you. And then I also am thinking, well, again, Pierre Paolo, who I mentioned earlier, and we talk about this a little bit in the talk that we had. So again, it won't be out before we're recording this. It will be out before this goes live. But there are different ways of teaching even within the school. We are somewhat limited to a framework, and then part of the other issue is that people coming out of a certain way will teach in that way, and so there is a lot of certain types of teachers, especially in I think in the American school versus the Brazilian school versus the other schools, who are are repeating that same thing. But I don't think it's all, and I think
I
that
just want to interrupt. I don't. I'm
yeah
more speaking. Not there's. I certainly had many exceptions to that, and
yeah
I mean, I didn't. I had a handful of six or seven teachers in my basic training, and there were exceptions among them. The majority of them were exceptions. I think more I'm
yeah
speaking to a mythos that I seem to have
yeah
gotten,
yeah.
and I
Sorry.
wonder if that's something that I think it's in the culture.
Yeah,
It may just be my
I think you're right.
projection and stuff that
No, I think
my
you're
own
right.
baggage, but
I
yeah,
think you're right. I was sort of again because I'm tired and kind of
that's okay.
going
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
But
I
I
just
think
wanted
I
to
think I
clarify
think
I wasn't
yeah no
criticizing teachers
no
in general or
I
yeah.
didn't think you were and but I think you're right. I do think that there is something in the mythos and I think that's where I was trying to kind of get to at the end is that there is this seemingly at least it seems to the three of us there is this thing there that I mean, before I even went to the institute, and it's not just in the Rolf Institute. It's in a lot of the SI stuff. But I remember taking a training up at KMI in Maine because it was closer, and this lady, one of the teachers who was a little drunk, said, like, when would the Rolf Institute get their head out of their ass? And like, and not really understanding that at the time, but then later looking back and being like, I guess some of that, yeah, some of that is there. There is this like in there is this. I mean, I definitely have an elitism towards other practices, which I also recognize as ridiculous. But that's kind of in the we hold to higher standards, or this is like
Thank you
the
for bringing that up.
yeah yeah
We hold
and
to
that's
higher standards is a
yeah
thorn in my
yeah
side.
yeah yeah. So it is. I mean, but that is like almost the crux of what you're saying. We hold to higher standards as a that's the mythos and that's this like yeah well, hey whose standards and who defines what's higher and is that not just the way to be like we're better than others and then is our head not just in our asses.
And then what are we performing?
Yeah. I think
Yeah,
I agree with you that it's there. What you're talking about is there. It's coming from some something in the atmosphere or somehow, and yet there's a lot of counter, examples too. But gosh, I feel like maybe if we had just talked about it, you know, openly at some point and socialized that conversation, I can imagine that would have been healthy. Um, I yeah, I think it's a good thing to talk about and to say if we say this is something that's present, then what are the kind of outcomes of that, right? So if we're saying that Rolfing is preeminently better than some other types of structural integration, it's better than these other somatic practices, like that's probably not going to encourage cross-pollination. And
Oh, we're hated by most.
we're
We're hated by most other SI practitioners. It's like, you know,
yeah, there you go.
yeah.
There you go. So
Uh-huh.
it's like, do we want, so if if that's if people don't want that to continue, then what would be, consciously choosing what, if first be aware of it, and then what would be kind of consciously choosing something other than that. Um, so I think that would be an interesting
Mhm.
and fruitful group conversation to have. I'm not really part of that group right now, so
I don't know if
you
any of
guys
us
can you
are.
guys can let me know
Yeah.
how it goes.
I'm still in it a bit, but I think I talked to you before about this, Ryan. I had a small period where I was like, I'm tired of what's not working, and I'm gonna try to fix this.
Yeah.
And then I just realized there's just a lot of toxic people who have no interest in actually listening or changing, and only want to put their stuff out there. And I recognize someone would say, "Well, isn't that you there?" And I would say, "No, I don't think that's what I was doing. I was very open to having input back and forth and see how could we make this a better community." But it it didn't last long because I just kind of got burnt out and was like, you know what, most of the people here don't really give a shit besides themselves, even though they're part of a group. And so I'm less and less a part of that because I'm reminded of what you're saying a bit of something. I'm going to paraphrase, and I was in a training and Kevin Frank wasn't teaching, but his wife wasn't. He happened to be there. I think it was then when he was talking to me, and he sort of said like something along the lines of, are you okay, like if this whole like project of ours doesn't, if it doesn't work, it doesn't
Mm.
get the limelight. And I remember at that time being like, no, like this is but thinking about that and thinking about what you're saying, there's a part of me that's almost like, in order for the mythos to change, it's almost like, does this all have to die and then be reborn in a phoenix of some sort, or a different incarnate? Like, does that, but isn't that then what the other schools have maybe been doing? I don't know. Or some of the other schools, the new school, like this has to die because it's there's almost no way to get the poison out of the tree, and then we just have to plant the seeds from the same tree, or a minor clone, but having gene edited out the mythos that isn't working. I don't know.
I don't know.
I appreciate all those questions. I don't have answers to them. I thought the same myself sometimes when I'm particularly disheartened and attached to the outcome of this institution or the culture around it. Um, but um, one movement inside me in relation to that has been to recognize my own arc in terms of that story, of exceptionality. And we've been talking a long time, so I don't want to, I won't
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go
tell the
soon.
story, but
No, I want to
oh,
tell it.
you want me
Tell
to?
no, not tell it. But then I'm gonna have, because your stories are great, Paul. I mean, that's why
Okay.
people aren't listening to me and Ryan. It's about
Yeah,
Paul.
no, you don't. No. I am not. This gets right to my point. I'm not special. So I
But is that a
okay.
performance? Are you performing not being special? Have you
Oh
learned
shit!
not to be
You
special,
caught
and
me.
so you're performing it? Okay, okay.
John Malkovich.
Yeah.
That's a reference for anyone who just thinks I'm saying gibberish. Well, in short version is that, and I wrote an essay that was rejected by the journal that dealt with some of this, and other stuff. But the short version is that I was moved by various experiences, somatic experiences, and I had a powerful experience with Rolfing. I was attracted to it for a bunch of reasons. My family happens to be very well educated. There's a lot of Ivy Leaguers in my family. So there's, and I'm a white middle class educated male in this society. So I came primed with a variety of unexamined attitudes about achievement and exceptionality and what should be and could be accessible to me, and a desire, because I didn't go to an Ivy League college, I still had that sense. I had a lot of other psychodynamic emotional things in me related to my family, related to other events in my life that caused me to want to that aligned with that, with wanting to achieve in a particular way, with wanting to be exceptional. I was a black sheep of the family too. I think a lot of us in this outlier fields like SI tend to have some sort of personality or experience or what have you that either attracts us to its exceptionality or its difference, its opposition to other fields or other ways of seeing things. So we're mavericks or iconoclasts or narcissists or some combination of those or something else, or visionaries, not just to be negative. Anyway, lots of things drew me to that. So I had all these things, all of these ingredients set up. Then I have Rolfing. Then I learn about, I want to learn this, and I hear Rolf, the Rolf Institute's, it's the shit. It's what I hear is it's the Harvard of SI. And SI is really the Ivy Leagues of the colleges, of the, so I'm like, well, I'm going to Harvard, obviously. And then I went to the Harvard, and I was grateful to be able to do that. And I didn't come out with with an overt aggression or criticism of other fields, but it was covert. I definitely felt like
totally
my shit was the better shit, and over the course of the humiliations of living the life and encountering reality on its own terms, I realized that I was full of shit a lot of the time, and so was a lot of the stuff that I had either interpreted or been taught, and so there's a lot more that whole process for me has developed into. But I guess what I was trying to do was to answer one answer for me for the what do we do with the state of this institution and this microculture of brilliance, visionariness, and other less pleasant attributes among in institutional and personal figures. I think if we start to just have conversations, I mean, it's so basic, I'm silly to say this, but if we have conversations, but especially if we examine our own participation in our own, why is this attractive? Like, why would we maybe need to burn it down? Is that hypothetical, Andrew? I think the only reason one would need to burn it down not that I'm advocating burning anything down or laughing if it burns itself down. I'm not advocating for that. I want to see things and people thrive. But the only reason is people's attachments to the way things are. And I think people tend to resist if they are attracted to the exceptionality of this, or the self-professed exceptionality of this profession. They're not going to want to let it go.
Yeah, I mean,
long story.
But that's the same with, because what I would say, it's the same because their identity is attached to that and what that means, and people don't want to question their identities for the most part. And I mean, I agree with it. I agree with what you say. When I was thinking, when you were saying at the very beginning, like, I don't know if I have those answers. I was thinking, of course not. Like, I mean, there may be some, but so much of what I hope we're doing here with each other, and then also with the greater good of listening, is, and this ties back to like the very beginning, is we're not saying these are the answers. We're saying what might the answers be, and we're sitting in conversation, we're sitting in discomfort, we're sitting in a field and saying, what may it be? I don't know, or it seems like this today, or and then we're also saying, well, hey, Paul, I think it's this, and Ryan says, well, no, add this, and we're allowing for not an Andrew, not a Ryan, not a Paul to be, but these bits of all, and it's in that where we, I think, get closer to this. What I will sometimes say is like the end, the goalless goal, right? We just keep getting closer to those answers for today.
Mm-hmm.
Ryan, I was gonna say, if you can, I'd love to hear from you, and then also maybe if we can wrap it up because my wife is going to shoot me.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're talking about, working in the field. And I recall during, I think, phase 3, I think it was Ray McCall who said, like, a lot of the teachers will acknowledge that you can achieve a lot more when you're doing a demo because all the students are watching you, and that creates, a field. And so we're working in, a particular set of values and flows of information and preconceptions and, patterns. And for me, what I experience is more free flow and an acceleration of that. And it was I think another teacher during basic training who said, like, everything's changing around us, and if we don't, adapt, then we're kind of going to be I forget what the metaphor was, like the tiny elephants on the island or something. You're caught in your own little island, and you're evolving and things are changing, but everything around you is moving on. And I think that's what's happening in, like, essentially post-secondary education. Everything's changing. People are looking for value. People are, expecting more. I think there's more an expectation of involvement and one's own subjectivity included in education, because that's kind of where things are going in high schools, I can say, because I taught in a high school, and I was a substitute teacher in high schools here in Portland. And so that's my read on kind of where things are going, and the same thing for higher education as far as continuing ed. So that's kind of my sense, is that, like, the field is really changing. I don't know if little subfields, like, let's say the Rolf Institute, can kind of be insulated enough to keep the pattern going in the way it's always been going for a while. I don't know. But there's so much more movement and research, and healthcare is changing, and technology is changing, and everything's just changing. And so I think most things are going to probably adapt in some ways. So that's where I get like really, it's like, I wonder what's going to happen. What's the training going to look like in the future for all kinds of sectors, but also like hands-on education too. Um, and I think that groups which are more open to the conversation will be more resilient and flexible and adaptable and be able to pick out trends and will be able to understand themselves they'll have more coherence and also more integration with their environment. They'll be more eco-receptive and so they'll have some better answers. And so
better socialized, you could also say too.
Yeah. So I don't know which groups will do that within the sort of hands-on and like structural integration communities, but it'll be interesting, and I think probably the pace is kind of picking up over the next decade.
Well, yeah, I'd love to go more. I'm gonna have to call it. But Ryan, one thing you said is, I never thought I would quote this ever, but what you said reminded me of an amazing quote by I don't know if he's still alive. Is Ferris Bueller still alive? He may be.
Matthew Broderick.
Good old Ferris. No, not Matthew Broderick.
Bueller?
The actual Ferris Bueller, not Matthew, but the actual Ferris
Ferris
Bueller.
Bueller was a real person?
No, I'm just making a joke. I was
just
okay. Just being an idiot. But life moves. Well, life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you can miss it. And I think that's a bit of like, are we looking around, or are we in our up our own asses?
And I think, can I say one more thing? Like part of Paul, what you were saying, like your recounting of your journey, that's so valuable in communities to spur those conversations. Because it's really, it helps me to hear your story and what you were saying, and connect it into my own journey and some similar themes. Like a need to achieve exceptionally, and then to experience to have more humility, and to be more receptive, and to continually seek answers. This is for me, to continually seek answers without needing to have all of them, or to have better answers than everybody else. Or I'd like to become more adept at having that types of qualities you're saying.
I can tell you how to have that, right? I can tell you what Paul has and what I'm working to have, and what makes it is a comfort in being vulnerable. I'm
super uncomfortable. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, but you're more comfortable than you used to be, and that's when I mean you're uncomfortable to be in conversation with, for sure. I mean, no one has to look. No one else has to look at you.
I make you guys uncomfortable, I'm happy.
No, but I'm serious, and I know I do need to go, because like literally the text messages I'm getting right now. But I think that's something I'd love to talk more about, because I think that's a big part. Is Paul, you still may be uncomfortable in that, but you're less uncomfortable, is my presumption, because what I hear you doing there is saying, these are things that I see as semi flaws in myself, and I want to share them, but I'm not beating myself up over them. And I'm okay to share this. It's about being vulnerability, and it's about being vulnerable. There's something, maybe that's not exactly it, but there's something in that, and maybe that's something we can talk about for next time. But for me, that's really what the key is, and what most of us, and sadly many of us in our community, and I say sadly because it seems the opposite of what we should. I hate that word. I don't like that word should, but is like the more for me, the more vulnerable and honest I can be with my clients, the more they can be. The more I can get underneath the layers and they can be more vulnerable with me, and I can say, "Hey, these are what we're working with, these underlying things." So that's my presumption.
Thank you for that. Thanks. Yeah. I just want to, it's a quick phrase. I know you got to go. I just want good.
Yeah.
Covert narcissism is kind of like the bogeyman for me. In where that mythos has affected my work and what scares me about the work and what gets in the way of the work. And I think it's being cultivated in the culture of the work. And that's a big problem. Yeah.
Oh, please footnote that for next time for you, because I would love to, because I think that actually will be a way of tying it into technique and other, because there's so much in there, but I do got to go. My dog needs to go.
Yeah.
My wife.
I'm so grateful for you to take the time, Andrew and Ryan. I'd love talking with you guys. This is great.
Yeah.
And go make up with your wife.
Yeah. I'll see you guys. We'll talk later on. Peace.
Okay. Yeah. Great to see you both.
Bye. Good to see you both. Thanks for listening to us at Touching Into Presence. We hope you enjoyed today's conversation. You can find out more about Paul at mosaicbodywork.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd appreciate it if you'd leave a positive review of the podcast and subscribe to it through the platform of your choice. When you do this, it really helps other people find us, and we greatly appreciate your support. We look forward to hearing back from you and seeing you on our next conversation at Touching Into Presence. Goodbye for now.